is the Sony STR-DH190, the stereo receiver budget king to beat? Stay tuned to find out. Well, hello YouTube, Chris the Frugal Audiophile with you here again today, and I want to review for you the Sony STR-DH190. This is a very affordable stereo receiver with some nice features and a few, well, issues we will say. Stay tuned for more about that. In the meantime, if you like my channel, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and bell notification. Also, thumbs up this video. Any interaction that you can give me is helpful and I really appreciate it. So let's talk about the Sony STR-DH190. To begin, I want to go over some features and specs. You can see it here before you. It's basically a black box. The sides and the back rear panel, they are all metal, as well as the underside of it is as well. And then it has some of the kind of standard plastic type feet that you see on a lot of these receivers. Of course, the front fascia is largely plastic. Actually, I think all except for the connectors for the headphones and the 3.5 millimeter auxiliary jack. It is all a plastic affair here on the front screen of it. Also, the remote is plastic as well, but I really do like this remote. More on that to come. So this is a standard, roughly 17-inch unit. It will fit easily inside of a 17-inch rack mount system if that's what you want to do with the unit, although you're going to have to get some sort of mount because it doesn't come with anything of that nature. It's just over 5 inches high, and then it's about 11 inches deep, and it weighs just over 14 pounds. Now, all the exact information on these specs is there on the screen before you to take a look at. Now, this receiver is rated at 90 watts into 2 channels at 6 ohms, and that is at 1 kilohertz. So probably if you are certainly pushing below that, you're going to need more wattage. And so that's a optimal situation for this receiver. I would say you're more looking at 30 to 40 watts into 2 channels each, into each channel for this receiver here. So not bad, but not outstanding. However, it only has a 0.09% total harmonic distortion. Again, that's at that 6 ohms, 1 kilohertz rating. So keep that in mind. And then the signal to noise is 96 decibels, which is good. I've heard better. My Emotiva Basics amplifier in there, I think it is 104 decibel signal to noise, so that's a little better. However, that amp was like $500 just for the amplifier. And this receiver has 4 analog RCA inputs, 1, of course, analog phono input. It's an RCA with a grounding screw, which is nice. And then it's got a 3.5 millimeter, it looks like a headphone jack, auxiliary input on the front of it, which I did use for some of my testing. You may have seen that in some of my previous videos. Finally, it's got Bluetooth 4.2, so an older standard of Bluetooth there. I believe this receiver has been out for a couple of years, so it's lagging behind a little bit in the Bluetooth, but it does have it and it does work. Now this receiver has 4 speaker output terminals. That means you can connect 2 pairs of speakers. You can run them both at the same time, but you're going to really raise the impedance when you do that, and it's going to cause some issues with it. So either use that sparingly or use it with highly sensitive speakers, or just to A/B between speakers, which is one thing that I did. It's a nice feature there, but not something that I recommend you use all the time, running 4 pairs of 4 speakers total, 2 pairs. And then it does have a 1/4 inch headphone output. Oh, and also, I almost forgot, it has a tape loop output on it, which is interesting. I didn't test that out. I don't really have a way to do that. It's there if one would like to use it. Myself, I did not. This amplifier does have bass and treble controls, which is nice to see on a unit like this. I did use that quite a bit, as each speaker I connected did need some tweaking. And also it has a direct mode, which is nice to see. I think a lot of times I found that sound to be a little bit thin, but Maybe that is the most direct sound, it's just not the sound that I like. It's nice to see that this stereo receiver does have a 2-year parts and labor warranty that is better than many electronics out there, but not as good as some. And finally, the cost is a little bit tricky because it kind of bounces around between about $160 and $200. I think I've even seen it for more than $200, but on average, it is between $160 and $200. And $160, of course, is a pretty good deal for this receiver. Now, I picked this one up on Amazon, used in like new condition for like 132 bucks. So overall, I think I got a pretty good deal on it. So now, what is the assignment for the Sony STR-DH190? And that is to be a good stereo receiver at a bargain price. How did it do on this assignment? To begin, I want to talk about some things that it gets right. The first thing is appearance. I really like the look of this stereo receiver. To me, it really reminds me of a late 90s, early 2000s, either stereo or maybe home theater receiver. My dad actually had a Sony surround sound receiver around 2001, and his was silver, but the DH190 really reminds me of that home theater receiver that my dad had back in the day. If you kind of like, that fascia with the blue OLED screen on it, a couple of good sized knobs, and little buttons across the front, you're going to like this one as well. I would not say that it is modern, but however, I would not say it would not fit in a modern decor scheme. So as far as, taste and aesthetics are concerned, that is very subjective, and you're going to have to decide for yourself if you like the look of it. Personally, I really do. I like the vibes that this thing is giving out. I think it looks cool. It's a piece that I think I would be proud to own if I had it in my AV rack. Next, as far as what this receiver gets right, is decent sound. It does sound pretty good. Now, I connected this receiver to several different speakers. I started out with the Sony SSCS5 because to me that was the most natural pairing. Since they are both made by Sony, it just seemed like it. I have them around. I think it's kind of the price point and the family in which Sony is aiming the DH190 towards. And so I tried that out, and that was an okay sounding pair. You might have seen, I posted a little video about that. But then I tried the ELAC BS41. I tried the ELAC B5s. I also tried the PSB Alpha A5s, as well as the Aperion Intimus T5 speakers that are in my home theater in there. And so I tried it on several different speakers. I didn't just listen to one and say, okay, I do or I do not like this amplifier. I tried it on several, listened to it for several hours, probably at least 12 hours, if not more, over the past few weeks and months as I was reviewing this unit. And in my opinion, the B5s from ELAC as well as the Aperion T5s were the best pairing for this receiver. I think they sounded the smoothest and the most natural. So those are my favorite pairings. Now the B5s are a little bit power hungry, so they're probably not the best option for this receiver, but they are one. And if you're not gonna, just crank the heck out of them and blast those puppies, they'll be just fine with this receiver. One of the first songs that I always check on my equipment when I'm testing it is Chocolate Chip Trip by Tool, because the soundstage on that song is just awesome, and it's a great test for most speakers in most situations. It sounded good on this receiver with all the speakers that I mentioned. Now with the Aperion speakers, it sounded incredible. It sounded as if like some of the sounds were coming off to the side. I mean, I had to go and check, are my surrounds on? And I'm like, no, duh, they're not on, because this is a stereo receiver and I only hooked up 2 speakers to it, you dummy. So I thought that sound was coming almost from behind me. It was way off to the side and just a little bit back in that song. Now that song is recorded well and that helps out a lot, but I did not hear that with the other speakers I used with any of them except for my Aperion speakers. That's a win for the Aperion speakers and a win for the Sony receiver as well there. But yes, soundstage was just fine on the DH190. Bass is for the most part tight. It's not perfect. We'll get into that in a little bit later, but for the most part it is fairly tight. I listened to I Can See Clearly Now by Holly Cole, and in that song there is a bass that is being played, the upright instrument that is being played in that song. Sounded pretty good. I was happy with the sound. It did depend on the speakers. Some were better, but on the B5s, which are kind of known to have a little extra bass, it was excellent, and I could enjoy listening to that song on the DH190. Treble was decent also. I fired up Cowboy Song by Garth Brooks, and it's a very acoustic guitar heavy song. It's a neat little story track there. I really like story songs, and that's one of them that I used to test. And the acoustic guitar, it sounded natural, sounded great. I was getting lost in the music and in the song using the DH190 on several different pairs of speakers. Overall, sound quality was decent, especially given the price of this unit. But I have heard better, even in this price range. More on that later. Next, as I mentioned before, I really like the remote. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's easy to use. All the buttons that you need are easy to find. Some of them are very similar in size, but those generally tend to be the ones that have similar type functions, like all the input buttons are the same. But then when you get down here to the bass and treble controls, those are a little bit different in shape, and they're separated a bit. So it's an easy remote to use. I do enjoy using this remote. It's not the heftiest of feeling remote. It's a very inexpensive plastic remote with rubber buttons, typical, but there's nothing wrong with it. And it's nice that it's included at this price point and includes as many features as it does. As many of you probably know, the SMSL and topping and all those Class D amplifiers that come out of China, they kind of use the same remote, and it's an okay remote, but it doesn't have a ton of features on it, and it's even smaller and more flimsy feeling. I like the Sony's remote better. Finally, it's nice that the DH190 has a built-in phono preamp. For those of you who have a turntable, maybe it's an inexpensive one or maybe it's a super fancy one that doesn't have a built-in preamp, it's nice that it's there. I did test it with my Fluence RT81. Sounded just fine. I do like the sound of the built-in preamp on my RT81 just a little bit better. It sounded a little more dynamic and a little more natural than the one built into the DH190. However, its preamp was not bad. You could certainly get by using it. Sony actually makes a turntable that I think they want you to pair with this stereo receiver around the $200 range. They would probably be a nice pairing if you're not looking to just break the bank on turntables, preamps, and stereo receivers. So I'm glad that it's there, the preamp on this device, and I think it's a decent one. All right, so this is where things always get fun, and let's talk about what the DH190 gets wrong. To begin, vocals can be a little harsh. Actually, on the Sony SSCS5s, they were a lot harsh and not really super enjoyable to listen to. And I did, turn the treble down as well as run it in direct mode, and still, I just found them to be a little unnatural sounding. They didn't hit my ears quite right. It wasn't super smooth. Now, when I took the DH190 into my home theater area and I plugged it into my T5 speakers, that did clean up quite a bit. It was a lot better. It didn't sound as good as when those appearance speakers are plugged into my Denon AVR X3400 with the Emotiva BassX A700 amplifier, but it was close. They just couldn't get quite as loud without starting to distort, and they just didn't sound quite as smooth, but very close. I think that the DH190 is pretty picky about what speakers you have attached to it. Part of that is it wants a 6 ohm impedance load, and part of that is, it's a pretty inexpensive Class AB amplifier that is included with this. So speaker pairing is going to be key. I recommend speakers that are more warm and on the soft side, or speakers that are just flat balanced. I think that the warmer, softer ones would be the best pairing for this, but balanced speakers would work as well. I feel like if you paired this to something from the likes of Klipsch or Yamo, you'd really be in for a lot of harshness and a lot of unnatural sounding treble being pumped into your ears, and I don't think it would be a great pairing. So if you're interested in this receiver, and really overall you should be, just be careful what speakers you pair with it. When I was testing out vocals, I listened to quite a few different songs. I have a variety on my test tracks list, but one of my favorites right now is She Used to Be Mine by Allison Luff. And on that track, her voice, it just didn't sound great. I mean, I could listen to it and it was fine, and if I didn't know any better, I'd probably be happy with it, but since I've heard things that sound better, I was a little bit disappointed in her vocal clarity. Now, this phenomenon with the harshness in vocals, it seemed to impact female vocalists more than males, so there must be something probably in that 1,000 to 2,000 hertz range, maybe a little bit higher, where the amplifier in this is not the clearest. However, males' voices tend to be a little bit lower than that, so you know it wasn't as noticeable on those, but it still was somewhat there, especially males with a higher pitch to their voice. When I fired up Always Remember Us This Way by Lady Gaga, I couldn't even hardly listen to it. Now that song, that soundtrack from A Star Is Born is not recorded super well, but I can listen to it on other equipment just fine, not with a DH190. It wasn't awful, but I did stop it about halfway through and move on to something else. So it's just something to keep in mind. Again, remember, you're dealing with an inexpensive stereo receiver that has a lot of features at the price point, so sacrifices are going to have to be made. As they say, life is a series of compromises, and the same is true with audio equipment, especially in the inexpensive range. Finally, as far as sound quality is concerned, the DH190 did lack a little in dynamics. I mean, it wasn't awful, they were there, but several tracks that I played, it was giving me the audio, it sounded, as it should, apart from what I just mentioned, but there wasn't as much dynamics when using amplifiers like my A700 or even my SMSL SU8 or my BassX A700 amplifiers. I understand those are more expensive amplifiers and they should perform better. I just want you to be aware of what I heard when I was testing out this amplifier, and I want to be honest with you. So if you decide to pick up the DH190, you know what you're getting into. Next, as far as something that this receiver gets wrong, is no subwoofer output, which is a little bit frustrating to me. I don't understand why some of these inexpensive stereo receiver manufacturers do not include a sub output. I get it, it does cost money to implement such a feature, but it would nevertheless be a nice one to have. Now, as you might have seen in a video I posted a few weeks ago, there are ways to connect a subwoofer to the STR-DH190 without having a dedicated sub output, and it's fairly easy to do, but it does require a subwoofer with a speaker level input, so something to keep in mind there. That's a smaller nitpick and something for which I did not take off as much. Something for which I did take off quite a bit in the DH190's grade is spring type speaker terminals. I hate spring type speaker terminals, and really I think in this day and age there's no excuse to put them on any product that is over $100. I mean, if you look at all of those Class D Chinese amplifiers on Amazon, they all have a 5-way binding post that accept banana plugs, but not the DH190. Again, it's a cost-saving issue. I do get it. However, these seem to be some of the cheapest spring-type terminals I have used. They're very tiny. I couldn't get much more than a 16-gauge wire into the hole on the spring terminals, and so it was a little frustrating to connect speakers. What I did was I just connected the speakers into the spring terminals with bare wire. I actually had to use that really thin wire that comes with the Dayton Audio speakers, and then I put banana plugs on the other end for easily changing out speakers, because almost all of my speakers, even some of the least expensive ones from like Mica and Dayton, have a 5-way binding post on them, so it's easy to exchange them out. Sony, you need to work on that. In the next version, whether it's the 290 or the 100 or 200, whatever your next upgrade is, I want to see 5-way binding post and a subwoofer output on that model. I'd even be willing to pay just a little bit more for said unit. Okay, having said all of that, we've gone through what it gets right and what it gets wrong. What am I going to give the Sony STR-DH190 for a Frugality grade? Well, I'm going to give it a B minus. You may have thought that I was going to go lower giving all of my critiques of this unit, but you have to keep in mind the price that you're paying for the DH190. We're not talking a $300, $400, $500 stereo receiver here. We're talking a model that can be picked up for, you know, $160 on sale. That's what it is right now. And so I kept that in mind when I gave it its grade, and I would say, given its price and feature set, it is a good unit, and it deserves the grade that I gave to it of a B minus. So finally, what are my recommendations? Well, to begin, if you are looking for a stereo receiver and you want this traditional style, you want something that is, you know, your standard 17-inch length, that it's got, you know, big knobs on the front of it, that OLED screen that we've seen had for years. You know, really in this price range, this is one of your only options. There are some other choices from Onkyo and Yamaha, and for the most part, they are more expensive. I think the least expensive Yamaha is $350. The least expensive Onkyo is $250. So that's something to look at and consider. Maybe they have more features that you want, you're willing to pay that, then, you know, go for it. But if your budget is under $200, you want a traditional looking Class AB stereo amplifier, the Sony really is one of your only choices, and it is not a bad option. However, if you want something with improved sound quality, maybe a DAC or even a subwoofer output, there are other options on the market from the likes of SMSL, Topping, IEMA, Lox-G, etc., etc. Now, you're going to be getting a Class D amplifier, but Class D amplifiers have come a long way in the past few years, and in some ways probably sound better than the DH190 here. I think that my SMSL SU8 over here, or sorry, DA8 over here, sounds a little bit better. Not a lot, but it does sound a little bit better. Granted, that cost, well, it's like $180, so I would say in the price range of the DH190, especially considering that a lot of times they cost $200. So if you want something that's a little bit more modern, got some more modern features, has 5-way binding post, you're going to have to look at something from those manufacturers. It's going to be Class D, and it's going to have a lot less analog inputs and most likely no phono input on it is either. So that's something to keep in mind. It just depends on your application, what you're looking to do, how much space you have, and your aesthetic preference when choosing the DH190, because I do believe there are better sounding amplifiers. At the same time, there are few that have this many options at this price point and look this way. So keep that in mind. Again, I really like the remote on the DH190. I actually like it better than a lot of those coming out of those Chinese amps on Amazon. So there you have it. That's my review and thoughts on the Sony STR-DH190. I really like it. I don't know if it's something that I am going to use necessarily, but if I was looking to put together an inexpensive 2-channel or 2.1 channel system, I would definitely gravitate towards the Sony, especially if I had the space for it, just because I like the looks, and I think with the right speakers it does sound pretty good. So do you own the DH190? What do you think of it? Do you think that it sounds a little harsh, especially in the female vocal range? I'm curious to see if anybody else has experienced that, or maybe it was, you know, just my testing area or my ears, but I don't think so. I'm curious. Let me know in the comments down below. I thank you so much for watching this video, and remember, frugal doesn't necessarily mean cheap.